The Automated Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Automated Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov. So this week's episode will be looking a little bit more at how technology is impacting the creative side of things. I've talked a little bit about creativity and art and how artificial intelligence and other technologies are impacting this in previous episodes. But it's really something I find quite interesting for myself, as I kind of identify or think of myself definitely more as an analytical type rather than a creative type. But my guest this week is quite the opposite. So his name is Pietro Gagliano. He is an award-winning creative, exploring what it means to transcend humanity in a post-singularity world. And he is particularly interested in the power of art, creativity, and storytelling as we navigate the fast-approaching implications of super-intelligent machines. So he is a co-founder of a digital agency called Studio Secret Location back in 2008, where he led talented teams in creating groundbreaking work in the interactive storytelling space, which is important for this episode. And this actually led to numerous awards, including 2 Emmys, 2 Webby Awards, a Cannes Lion, and 10 Canadian Screen Awards. So he's also the founder of Transitional Forms. This is a studio lab developing new forms of entertainment content through creative machine intelligence. And this attempts to further explore the intersections of storytelling and technology. And this really leads us to the main topic of this week's episode, which is the dynamic film Agence. That's Agence, which only came out at the end of September. So it's really quite timely that we had this discussion. So for those of you who haven't seen Agence or interacted with Agence, I'm going to try and describe it as I experienced it. I tried it out a number of times before the interview took place, but I really highly recommend you to go check out the website, which is agence.ai, for more information on it, as well as where you can purchase and download it and try it out if you wanted. So Agence allows you to interact with 5 small, kind of 3-legged AI agents living or existing on a small moving planet. You'll find in this episode it's also really difficult to find the right kind of words to describe what's going on, simply because it's a relatively new medium here. So in fact, the planet itself moves according to the basic weight adjustments of these AI agents and other things on the planet. And this forces the AI agents to constantly balance so as not to fall off the planet into the void of space, which happens quite often, especially as they interact, they bump into each other, and they even lash out and kick each other at times. So you can actually pick up and move these agents so as to help them survive and avoid fights, but you can also place a seed on the planet that grows into a flower and eventually into a large tree if the conditions are right, which leads to various different endings and different ways that this story unfolds for the little agents on the planet. So the entire experience lasts some 5 to 10 minutes, but I think the interesting part here is that it can be repeated a number of times, which leads to completely different outcomes every single time, as your interactions, as well as those of the agents, are never the same twice. Now, this is a very basic description, which I really hope paints a bit of a picture for you. But the really interesting aspects of this experience, as well as the impacts and possible future ramifications of AI in film, I think are really drawn out quite well in my conversation with Pietro. So I won't really delay that any further, and we can jump right into the interview. Great. Well, I am here with Pietro from the Agence film, although perhaps dynamic film or interactive experience is a little bit better. Thanks for coming on to the podcast, Pietro.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, one of the ways that I like to start episodes with my guests is to ask a little bit of your initial interest. So we'll be talking about artificial intelligence, a little bit of VR, and the film industry. But I wanted to get your initial views as to why you got interested in film and specifically AI.
Sure. I mean, this might be a stock answer, but they say that the person you are as an adult is the person you were when you were 10 years old. So when I was a kid, I had a video camera, and I guess I was a filmmaker, but I was always trying to use the technology that I had around me, trying to jam it into the filmmaking process. Like I had Mario Paint and a synthesizer, and
Mm.
just trying to make interesting movies to make my family laugh or cheer or whatever. And so I have a career in content creation, the interactive content creation. And so those two things have come together with my fascination and obsession with super intelligence and the technological singularity.
Hmm.
And so I guess that's what brought me here to make a film powered by AI.
Terrific. Well, I think it's very timely, as I mean, many people around the world are talking about, the singularity as it might be coming in 2040 or 2050, depending on
Who knows? Yeah.
whichever futurist you follow or listen to. But I think the kind of the main reason that I brought you onto the podcast today was really to talk about this new dynamic film, as I mentioned, Agents, which came out less than 2 weeks ago. I think the end of September, right?
Yep, that's right.
Terrific. Well, in the pre-recorded phase of this podcast, I'll kind of give a brief structural description of what Agents is. But maybe we could touch on the history of this. Like, why did it come up, and what the objective is, if there is one, with such an interesting project.
Yeah. As in terms of history of the project, I had just come off of a 10-year or so career in interactive filmmaking or interactive content creation. I was one of the co-founders of a company called Secret Location, and we were purchased by Entertainment One several years ago. And I resigned from that company. Still work with them. They're amazing, and that company is a part of my heart.
Hmm.
But I wanted to pursue artificial intelligence as a technology to help with content creation. And so I started a company called Transitional Forms and partnered with the National Film Board of Canada. And in early conversations with on Agents, the project, but as we developed it, the early conversations were like, what if we could embrace this notion of three-way authorship in content creation, where there's not just one linear author like a filmmaker. It's not being authored by the filmmaker and the audience through
Hmm.
interactivity, but a third author in there with machine intelligence. And how do we use that factor of AI to create something that's dynamic and different and living in real time?
So that's the real kind of definition of what a dynamic film is. It's this three-way authorship. It's not just the person or the organization that produces something and the viewers that are receiving it and interacting with it, but there's this third author that's interacting with everybody else that's involved in this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And, dynamic, there may be a better word for that, but I like using the word dynamic because it implies this like real time change, this unfolding, this living quality to
Mm,
to
mm.
the content that, say, even interactive films, which I've done a number of interactive films in my career. Um, they're still static in a certain sense. They have branching narrative, but you still only have so many branches on the tree. But with artificial intelligence and real time game engines, you can have this kind of, even though when you look at a cloud, it always looks like a cloud, or you
Hmm.
look at a
Hmm.
tree, it always looks like a tree. But there are endless possibilities in the algorithm that that makes these things. That's what we wanted to do with filmmaking in this sense.
Right, right. Yeah, I had a number of questions for you regarding the I guess the difference between a dynamic film, which I think is a relatively new term, and the interactive films. I mean, I'm not at all connected to kind of the creative arts or the filmmaking industry, so a lot of these kind of discussions are a little bit foreign to me, which is why I'm so excited about having you onto the podcast. But you said that you've been involved in a number of interactive films before. I think myself and a number of the listeners are maybe more familiar with the recent Black Mirror Netflix special Bandersnatch that came out 1 to 2 years ago, where the viewer was able to kind of choose their own storyline, choose the different kind of actions that the actors were partaking in the actual film, and with that there would be new storylines. Can you maybe touch on a couple other examples today? Maybe if there are any other popular ones that I've missed.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really pleased to see Netflix dive into this that medium, because making interactive films through Flash Player on the web
Hmm.
many years ago, it's really hard to find that audience that's going to sit down in front of a browser, for example, in front of their laptop with their mouse and keyboard.
Hmm.
So it's really neat to see Netflix as a medium that can actually broadcast interactive content, and with a user base that can use it. That's really wonderful to see. So I would say the best examples actually live on that platform.
Mm.
There's a Minecraft one. There's a kind of a wilderness one, and obviously Bandersnatch is the most popular. So it's really nice to see that type of medium gaining in popularity, and people knowing that, hey, their choices as an audience now can affect the actual narrative of the content.
And this is all relatively new, isn't it? I think there was a couple examples that I looked into that were, maybe some 50 years ago or so. But it was kind of, a moderator would get on stage and say to the audience, which path do you want to go down? And then maybe the film reel would be selected based on the path. But this more kind of interactive aspect in film is a little bit more new than, say, other forms. No.
Yes, in some ways, but in others, you can see it as probably the oldest form of storytelling, where
Mm.
because let's say we rewind to primitive humans around a campfire, and we're discovering language, and we're telling stories of the hunt, or what we need to do as a tribe, and etc. Like, who knows? I would love to know what those
Right,
stories
right.
were. But I think that the original form of storytelling was inherently interactive, and that's been lost over the years. And thank God we invented the printing. I say we as if I had something to do with it. The printing press and radio and television, these are all one way forms of communication, right? You have
Hmm.
the author puts it in print, sends it out, and the audience can interact with it in some ways in their imagination. But the original form of storytelling was to a live audience, and the storyteller was watching where there are twinkles in people's eyes. They're trying to get reactions, and if they do, they'll lean into that. I think that's the most beautiful, purest form of storytelling that we can involve artificial intelligence in today.
That's really interesting. Maybe now we can dive a little bit more into the dynamic film itself. I mean, I played it, I experienced it. I don't know the proper word to use, but a number of times yesterday, and it was interesting. A couple times it did get a little bit creepy at some points, where you're interacting. In the words of your website, it says you're a god to these little agents that are moving around the small planet. But it was kind of creepy a couple times, where you feel like there's a complete disconnect between your actions and the agents. But then sometimes the experience would stop or slow down, and then these agents would look at you, and you felt like there was a little bit more awareness of
Mhm.
these agents actually interacting with you, which I think made the whole experience a little bit more, I guess, close to an experience rather than just a passive viewing thing that you would do.
Yes, yes. And I think that, we've put this across multiple platforms, and each one has their advantages. But
Hmm.
I really do like the VR version, because it allows you to share the same space as the creatures that live on this little planet. It,
Right.
it really does give you that sense of responsibility for them, awareness of your impact to their world. Maybe sometimes it makes you feel like, oh, do they actually know that I'm there? It's a real mixed bag of emotions that you have when you're actually sharing the same virtual space as the creatures.
Right, right. And these creatures, maybe so that we don't get ahead of the audience, but they're individual AI agents, right? And hence the name of the film, of the experience itself. Do each of them have a different personality? Because I read that they're mostly focusing on balancing on this planet that is constantly shifting and moving.
Yeah, so a little bit of background on there. There's actually two different types of artificial intelligence that we're using in the experience.
Hmm.
The first is more commonly used in it's a game AI, heuristic functions that are basically programmed into the agents that if this scenario occurs, then they should do this in response, and that makes them really fun to interact with, and they essentially carry the different forms of the storyline that we have in place for it to exist as a film.
Hmm.
But the other type of artificial intelligence is more on the machine learning side, where we use reinforcement learning. Our engineers train these characters with rewards and disincentives millions of times over, and they
Hmm.
develop their own mini brain, their own neural network. And so those types of agents actually have their own agency, and they're making decisions for themselves. So in that sense, the reinforcement learning side, they do have their own personalities, and that's based on how they've been trained. But
Right.
the game agents don't necessarily have their own personalities, although the way the story unfolds is we're trying to lean into emergent narrative, where you make their personalities exist in the story that you're telling
Mhm.
yourself as you're interacting with them.
Right, and that's kind of what I got yesterday when I was, I played through it a number of times. It was, relatively quick, 5 to 10 minutes, but every single time something completely different happened. Right, there was never the same view through or playthrough that happened twice, which was refreshing to experience actually.
That's great. That's great to know, because certainly that's one of the more challenging aspects of dynamic filmmaking is
Hmm.
your your uh, your actors may or may not do what you expect them to do, and so it's really hard to know what outcome is going to happen.
Right. Yeah, and I tried. The I guess the for the viewers, I'll explain this a little bit more in the pre-recorded session. But yeah, you can place these flowers, and the agents interact with that flower. And I tried to place the flower, kind of in the exact same position when the agents were moving more or less in the exact same way a number of times. And each time that this happened, the interactions were very different. Some would jump off the planet, some would be a little bit more interested in the flower. It was interesting to see that. Even if I tried to make the experience similar, just as a small test, it failed.
The analogy that we often use when we were developing the project was that you can predict the outcome of a single pendulum, but as soon as it's a
Mm,
double pendulum, it becomes chaotic, and you can't predict what will happen. And with all of the different moving parts that are in agents, even though we've tried to keep it very elegant and very simple,
mhm,
and keep the storylines very simple as well. There are many different systems, dynamic systems at play, so it really becomes hard to predict what will happen. And so that's where it kind of leans into becoming a bit more of a game experience, whether it's a puzzle or something that needs to be solved or different things to try. So we're really interested to hear what the audience thinks of it in that way.
right. And what has been a little bit of the reaction from the viewers, from the audience? I'm assuming now it's been a couple of weeks that you have at least some interesting feedback.
Yeah, I think that it's been mixed. I mean, some folks really enjoy it, the innovation quality, the vision, the interaction with the AI, and it's wonderful to hear about. As I said, the emergent narrative quality is something that we really wanted to lean into. So when I hear of people or see people doing playthroughs and they're telling the story of what they think is happening on the planet,
Hmm.
that's absolutely my favorite, and I think it's been a great success in that way. And at the same time, we're trying to invent a new category of experience that we had to try to, whether it's the best term or not, coin a
Hmm.
term,
Hmm.
dynamic film, for this. And so it's really hard to find a place where it fits and understand the audience expectation going into it. Like if they have an expectation of it being a game or a film, it falls somewhere in between. So um some of the audience hasn't had the patience, or maybe it's a little too open-ended or too abstract. There's not enough instruction with goals and stuff in
Hmm.
the experience. So some people, it's not for them, but others have responded quite well to it.
Yeah, I think I mean I can only speak about my own personal experience, but it was quite interesting just to think that this experience film game, whatever you want to call it, you're actually interacting with artificial intelligence agents, right? I mean, they've been pre-programmed, or they've learned, right? There are those two different entities that you're
Hmm.
interacting with, but the fact that you're actually able to interact with an artificial intelligence kind of tangible agent, for lack of a better word, makes this project, makes this experience quite unique compared to, say, when I was younger playing video games. You definitely knew that there was a highly specific pre-programmed set of outcomes that the agents in that medium would have.
Yes, absolutely. And in that sense, the best reaction of this project has been from people from the machine learning community when they say, hey, I didn't realize I needed this kind of art injected into what I do, because I spend my days looking at,
Mhm.
charts and graphs and optimizing this and that. And obviously I'm not an engineer. So
Mhm,
what
mhm.
they do is magic to me just as much as what I do is to them. But the reaction from the machine learning community has been, wow, now we can actually observe these creatures who are evolving within a story world. And because humans learn best through storytelling, it seems like a really great fit for, perhaps not hardcore AI research will be done within story worlds, but it really does allow you to relate and observe these creatures in a new way.
Yeah, I think that maybe that's the benefit for me, anyways, and maybe a number of the listeners here that will go and try it out afterwards, which I hope you guys do. It's quite interesting. The fact that you as a viewer are interacting with these agents, and the way in which you're interacting is different every single time, maybe makes you think of AI in a vastly different way, rather than it being some sort of abstract or rather cold technology, right? Like
Mhm.
whether it's within social media, or showing you different posts on Facebook, as I think we're all a little bit more aware now that the Social Dilemma documentary came out.
Mhm,
Um,
absolutely.
I think it's maybe a little bit more of a warm or more interesting way of interacting with this relatively new technology than has been available for people otherwise.
Yes, and that's one of the things that we wanted to express with agents as an art piece is, asking the question of our human responsibility as we're creating
Mhm.
these artificial lives that never asked to be born in the first place. And that, through a piece of art, perhaps we can cause a conversation to happen about, the speed at which that we're developing AI, and the precautions that we should be taking to, say, nurture this intelligence rather than enslave it. And
Mhm.
that's something that there's no answers in agents, but maybe it starts that conversation at the right time in humanity's evolution.
None more famous than Elon Musk has really brought this up, right? There needs to be kind of a ethical discussion around the use and implementation of AI. Maybe not so much for the benefit of AI, but certainly for the benefit of humans. But if agents, this dynamic film, is able to kind of add to that dialogue, I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree, and it's going to be such an interesting, couple decades as all of this stuff unfolds. But
Mhm.
we don't know how human we can make AI, but it's this idea that AI needs to understand us as humans, how we learn, how we think, how we interact with each other, what matters to us. I think that's really what's important. And right now, I think the best thing that we can do, because the AI isn't that as sophisticated to necessarily do that, is to understand the machine, and for us humans to really understand how the machine works. And hopefully through pieces of art like agents, and pieces of content like agents, the barrier to be able to do that is lowered, where you don't have to be a machine learning engineer necessarily to interact with these intelligent creatures.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's really easy for us to say interact with a robot, right? It's a physical, tangible object that's present in the real world. But AI, for the most part, is invisible. It's not there, and you're not necessarily interacting with it knowingly. It's more or less interacting with you knowingly. But I think a project like this really brings that out, or changes it into a kind of a, maybe not a physical, but certainly a more in the real world object that you can interact with. I did want to go back to one point that you said. This is kind of maybe a first dynamic film experience for many people to interact with AI. What about the future? I can only assume that you would want to be doing more of these, or know of other organizations or filmmakers that want to do more of this. Do you see that these kind of dynamic films are going to be growing in popularity and number over the next, say, decade or two?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the video game industry, which already has embraced artificial intelligence for many years, I think that the gaming industry will adopt the technology much sooner and faster than it will be adopted with and used with films. But I think that the line between game-like experiences and film-like experiences will continue to blur, and you'll have, real-time content that can be fully interacted with or fully passive. And I think that AI is key to unlocking that new medium.
One of the things that I've heard, discussed a little bit in my, not so connected state with the film industry is, giving the audience the ability to choose in a theater, for instance, maybe before COVID, but giving the audience the ability to choose, or cast a vote in a movie, right, through their cell phone, to decide where the story would go next. And I guess it would be, the majority rules, and the story would go one way or the other. Do you see maybe that being blended into these dynamic films, or is that too linear? Is that too connected to these interactive films that you were working on before?
For sure. I think that collaborative experiences are just as much a part of the future as individualized experiences. And that actually becomes even more interesting. And just to break the frame of a theater, now that we do have virtual reality and virtual
Mhm.
places where we can gather, and certainly, COVID has really pushed that notion forward faster than it would have otherwise. I think that the content of the future will be potentially dreamlike in nature, where your preferences, who you are as an individual, are at play, and evolving the content in real time, and
Mhm.
hopefully, surprising you or moving you, etc. But that's not to say that it should only be that it will only be individuals, interacting with these dynamic worlds. I think that there's just as much room for um, communal experiences and larger audiences gathering, say, in virtual spaces, and having content created for, whoever is in the room. I think that'll be really interesting.
Seems a little bit difficult to form in one's mind, to imagine that this is going to happen. But if this is already being done to in a certain extent now, maybe it's also for people that haven't used a VR headset. I have an Oculus Quest. I unfortunately, I don't think Agents works with an Oculus Quest. You need the Oculus Rift. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of kind of collaborative play environments that you can do or interact with in a VR world that makes it significantly more surreal than getting together in a theater and watching one screen in front of you.
Yeah, and it kind of harkens back to that original form of storytelling we were talking about before,
Hmm.
where you might have a DJ trying to get everybody enjoying themselves on the dance floor, and that DJ, he or she, has to really be in tune with the audience and listening to what they want and reacting in real time. Just like improv comedy is another example, or
Hmm.
live theater is another example. I think that the the algorithms and the intelligence that drive our experience in the future will be in tune with either the individual audience member or a mass of audience, and that's just going to be really interesting to see.
Yeah, it's almost like we needed all this high tech in order to go back to how things were done in the past, with
Exactly.
no tech. Um,
Yeah.
One of the other questions that's been kind of percolating into my mind during this discussion is kind of the future negative impact of, say, AI in film or in dynamic film, right? Like right now, the AI that's in agents or in, say, video games, for instance, is quite low level, right? Like they're not capable of even simulating fear or pain on any remotely close extent to what humans are able to do. But if I'm reading a lot of these AI futurists and people that are in the field correctly, there is maybe some future point that's not too far off where at least AI would be able to simulate or express emotion or fear, maybe not to the extent of humans, but maybe a little bit less. So have you taken this into consideration as maybe the future of dynamic film will grow?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that I have solid answers on
Hmm.
that in terms of my own work, but that is something that I'd like to pursue to understand more. And certainly, at a point, Agents isn't anywhere near this, but at a point, as a content creator, I will have to make a choice. Around the choices that I give the intelligence that lives in the content for our entertainment purposes, and it really becomes a deep moral dilemma and ethical question on creating life that is enslaved to our entertainment, or is it
Hmm.
something that's
Hmm.
actually helping the world. Certainly that might be a finer line as we go into the future, but another reason why I wanted to create Agents is to start asking these questions and making people really think about that.
Yeah, well, I think I certainly think that has been done for myself, and hopefully for other viewers or experiencers. I still don't know the proper term of people that have been interacting with this. Um, One of the kind of like last questions I want to ask you here is what will what do you think will be the kind of future of the film industry if these dynamic films start to take off and start to be implemented as the technology of AI will become more powerful and more lifelike? Do you see maybe humans being less and less involved in film?
I see it as more of a change than anything.
Mm.
In terms of impact on jobs, I think that AI will lead humans to be creative in wild ways that we currently don't imagine. So there'll be a paradigm shift there where it's hard to answer that question until we're on the other side of it. It's
Hmm.
like hunter gatherer society versus an agriculture society, right? The
Yeah,
the hunter gatherers couldn't necessarily understand. They'd be like, well, what about our hunting?
yeah,
what what,
yeah.
what I'm a hunter, so what will I do? So it'll be very similar in terms of, it's definitely artistic jobs. um at the same time, I think, well, I guess there's three parts to my answer. The
Hmm.
AI that we currently have is very good at predicting, and it's very good at systematically doing tasks. So if you're an artist, and you're a true artist, and you're trying to create things that no one's seen before or think outside of the box, I don't think that AI is going to, steal your job, quote unquote, anytime soon, because
Hmm.
you're already breaking patterns. And it's time for the people who are artists that have, maybe that 90% of their job is systematic. It's time to really think about that as part of your job. If what you're doing is formulaic, then as an artist, you should be breaking outside of that as well. I think that there will be a change in how the audience is seen as content creators themselves. So we might be able to make choices as an audience member in these dynamic pieces of content that then become wonderful pieces of content and that can be shared, and that I could go into your experience, Mark, and have a great experience.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like allowing the audience in a certain way to become content creators themselves. And I see that as another way that human creativity will be preserved for a long time.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well. It becomes a much more collaborative experience, as we talked about, rather than kind of passive consumption of the media, whether it's art or video games or film or whatnot. If you're actually able to become engaged in the process of creating it, I think it also makes it more interesting to consume that product in whatever form it takes.
Yeah, I guess AI is a tool, and it can be used for good. It could be used for evil. But I think that AI is a tool for creativity, and human creativity is extremely powerful, especially if we can have tools that empower that creativity.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably a terrific place to end. No.
Yeah, awesome.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about the future of agents. I did read somewhere that there's a project Gilgamesh, if I'm not mistaken. This might be the next form of agents and might tie into what we were just discussing. If you're
Yes,
able to talk to that.
for sure. So in the making of agents, there's a lot of tool making and content creation happening simultaneously. So what we were noticing was that the reinforcement learning side of it was, there are certainly clunky parts of it that maybe if we created better tools, it would allow me as a filmmaker to participate a little bit easier with the training of these creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So we codenamed this thing called Project Gilgamesh, which we have some development money to pursue later this fall. And the idea is, can you lower the barrier of access to reinforcement learning by potentially using storytelling frameworks to create artificial intelligent agents? And so we're in development of that later this fall. And in the meantime, we're trying to lean into this initiative that will eventually feed into Project Gilgamesh, hopefully. But this initiative where if somebody is a reinforcement learning engineer or is interested in it, wants to give their go at it, that we've published a training environment on our website, agents.ai, in the technology section, where you can use our story world environment and train your own agent. And if you come up with something interesting, you can send it to us and we'll take a look and potentially put it in the film. And so we'd like to, continue that initiative and see if there's any interest there. And if there is, certainly, put more focus on refining that process and engaging with that type of community.
Terrific. That sounds really exciting, actually. Pietro, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Where can people find you? I will have the link up to the website, agents.ai. But if you want to shout out a couple places that people can reach out to you or follow you, go ahead.
Sure. The company website for Transitional Forms is transforms.ai,
Mm-hmm.
transforms with an S. Also check out nfb.ca, our co-production partners on Agents. They're amazing. And I'm not huge into social, but you can find me. Pietro Vision is usually my handle. And agents.ai, agence.ai is the main website for everything that has to do with the dynamic film.
Terrific. I'll have I'll search those and I'll put them up in the show notes for the listeners to find if they want to as well.
Awesome.
Great. Well,
Thank
thanks
you so
again.
much. I
Yeah.
really appreciate you having me, Mark. This
It's
was
a
awesome
great
conversation.
discussion. Thank you very much for coming on. Much
Great. And
appreciated.
talk to you again soon.
Sure thing.
Okay. Bye.
So thanks for listening to this week's episode. If you want to support the podcast, you can leave a like or a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you want to get in touch, feel free to do so over Twitter or LinkedIn by searching for Automated Podcast. On the website, automatedpodcast.org, you can leave a comment on any of the episodes, read the transcripts, and look at the sources I use in all of these episodes. There are also blog articles and additional resources and information on this topic, and podcast if you are looking for more. See you next week.